All right, hello and welcome everybody. I'm Danya Ramori. I'm the director of the Wallace Stegner Center's Environmental Dispute Resolution Program, as well as faculty in the College of Law and in the City Metropolitan Planning Department at the University of Utah. And as those of you who are listening in hopefully know, the focus of this session is on collaboration and conflict resolution. The subtitle of this session is What Every Public Official Needs to Know. And I would say what every person working in the public sector or every person needs to know. The content we're going to cover today is as relevant for our personal lives as for our professional lives. So as we go through and talk about collaboration and conflict resolution and the related skills, I really encourage everybody to think about how these skills pertain to your work lives, but also your everyday lives. A lot of the students I work with call my classes the How to Be an Effective Human training. Before we jump in, I just want to let folks know that we're going to send out a survey. So you should see a survey here in a moment. Please fill that out, and that will allow us to have a sense of who's here on the call. And while you fill that out, I just want to say a little bit more about myself and the Environmental Dispute Resolution Program that I run. The goal of our EDR program, as we call it, is to promote a culture of collaboration throughout the Mountain West, particularly around environmental and natural resource issues. We do a lot of work in what we call the human environment, and my background is actually in environmental policy and planning, so we do a lot of work particularly around planning and community issues. Our EDR program provides many resources to really help folks collaborate and understand what collaboration is, and hence why I'm here today to talk. We also do a lot of trainings and provide other services such as coaching and facilitation to help people actually work together and collaborate. I myself am a pracademic, meaning I'm a practitioner and an academic. So I teach about and study collaborative processes, but I also am out there practicing. And as I said, my academic training is in planning and public policy. So I think I come from a similar background as probably many of you on the call. I personally am very passionate about providing people skills and resources to work through and solve conflict on their own so that they don't need me as a facilitator to show up. And that's really part of what I want to do today, is help raise everyone's awareness of what that looks like and provide some basic skills for how do you as a practitioner, how do you as a public official or just somebody working in the public sector show up, work with others to resolve conflict. As you maybe have gotten a sense, I'll be moderating my own session, or rather I'd say facilitating. So sorry, you're stuck with me. And this is a webinar format, which is a little different than the meeting format I'm used to. So hopefully I'll be able to work through the text smoothly, because I want to make this somewhat engaging. I want to have you all share and share a little bit with each other via the chat. So we're going to give that a try, and hopefully it'll work smoothly. And just so you know what to expect, this is going to be a total crash course in collaboration and conflict resolution. The things that we'll touch on today are things that I spend semester-long courses teaching about individually. So really the goal of today is just to give you an awareness and develop a shared language and understanding of what collaboration is, how it's tied to conflict resolution, and what it entails. Specifically, we'll talk about what collaboration is and what it isn't, why collaboration is important, how collaboration is related to but different from public participation, and why this all matters for public officials and others working in the public sector. So again, this will be a whirlwind tour. I hope that you get a lot out of it, but I also hope that it raises your curiosity, and maybe you want to continue to have some conversations about how to do all this stuff, and maybe to help your teams have the skills to do all the stuff we're going to talk about today. A few little things in terms of Zoom etiquette. I would really like for us all to be able to interact with each other a little bit. So we're going to do that via chat. My ask of you all, if you can, is to rename yourself in rename yourself in Zoom. And the way you should be able to do that is you should see a thumbnail picture of yourself in your Zoom screen. If you scroll over that, you should see 3 little bubbles in the right-hand top corner. Again, assuming this works the way I think it does, you should see that. You should be able to click on those 3 bubbles in the top right-hand corner of your little Zoom screen, and there should be an option to rename yourself. So if you're seeing that, click on rename, and then make sure your first and last name and then your organization are showing in your name. That way, when we share via chat, we will see who's sharing what, or different perspectives are coming from different organizations. So give that a try. Again, if you don't see that option or if you can't figure that out, no worries. And then in terms of the chat, how this is going to work is everybody should see a chat option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you click on that, you should see an option, as is in the chat right now, to make it so that your chat either goes to all panelists or all panelists and attendees. please click on that so it goes to all panelists and attendees. So again, open up your chat, you'll see the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then at the bottom of that little chat box, you should see an option to send your Zoom or your chat to all panelists and attendees. So set that up like that. And let's give it a try. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a prompt in the chat, which again, hopefully you've set up so it's gonna go to all panelists and attendees. So hopefully you'll see each other's responses. I'll put a prompt in the chat, and what I'd love you all to do is just type in your response, but don't enter your response until I say to. That way everybody's responses will come in at the same time. So my first prompt to you all in the chat box is, what is one word you think of when you think of conflict? And I encourage you all to be very honest, to be willing to share with each other. So take a moment and type in the chat, what is one word you think of when you think of conflict? And no right or wrong answers. Don't hit enter until I ask you to. And if you do hit enter too early, that's okay, fine. And one word you think of when you think of conflict. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. And once you've entered your response, take a moment and look through each other's. And again, there's no right or wrong answer to these. I really want you to be honest. So what I'm seeing in these responses, lots of different experiences, but a lot of experiences with disagree or anger or stress or argument, frustration. Some people just saying difference of opinion or just difference. And basically the answer is yes, conflict can and often is all of those things. We'll talk a lot more about that in a moment. So we're gonna do the same thing, and well done with the chat, everybody. I appreciate you giving this a try. A new prompt in the chat, again, type your response in, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. Honestly, how comfortable would you say you are or not with dealing with conflict? Think about that for a moment. When you're ready, type your response in, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. Don't feel rushed. And again, once you've entered yours, take a moment and look through each other's responses. So I'm seeing some people think they're very comfortable with conflict. Some are okay, some are super uncomfortable. A lot of times when I ask these questions, people say, well, I'm comfortable with conflict in work, but not in my personal life, or vice versa. And again, the answer is yes. I'm a conflict resolution professional, and dealing with my family conflict is still really hard, right? And that's okay. We're gonna talk about the skills that help us be more comfortable with conflict, or at least know how to deal with it when it happens. So new prompt, we'll do the same thing, type your response in, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. What is one word you think of when you think of collaboration? And again, be totally honest. Some of you have probably had great experiences. Some have probably had some really unpleasant experiences. So again, one word you think of when you think of collaboration. Type your response in, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. And again, once you've entered your response, take a moment and look through each other's. I'm seeing everything from difficult to harmony to magic. Some people probably had some good experiences. That's great. Opportunity, listening, open-mindedness. We're going to talk about a lot of that stuff. And difficult and opportunity can go well together. It is sort of all of those things. And I'm seeing a meh, right? That like, maybe I've had some not so good experiences. I want to talk about the pragmatic skill set of collaboration and how probably what a lot of you have experienced as collaboration isn't what we call collaboration. But we'll get to that in just a moment. One final prompt via the chat, and then we'll jump right in. I'd love to hear from you all. What is one thing you would like to get out of this session? I'm not making any promises. Again, this is a total crash course, but I'm interested to at least hear what would be helpful to you. Take a moment, type your response, and when you're ready, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. Take a moment, look through each other's. I'm seeing new ideas and tools, ways to stay calm, strategies, toolbox, approaches, being more comfortable with conflict. Again, I can only do so much here in an hour. And if I had my druthers, I'd have lots and lots of time with you all, because this is It's a skill set anybody can learn, but it takes practice, and there's a lot of pieces to it. So we'll at least go over some of these basic things today. So with that, I'm going to jump in and start screen sharing. We will be interacting throughout the presentation, so just know I'm going to keep using the chat to engage everybody, but for now I'm going to just deliver a little bit of content. So I always like to start by just talking about what I call the basics or fundamentals of conflict. Through many years of doing this work and trying to help people work together to solve problems, I've come to accept that conflict just is. We don't always see eye to eye. We have different preferences. We have different ideas. It just is. It's not good. It's not bad. It just is. And the sooner we accept that, the sooner we can accept that it's what we do about conflict that matters. As you all probably know, conflict can be very destructive, right? It can lead to war, but it can also be very productive and generative. I like to think about the coming together of two things, two ideas, two perspectives, two interests, or multiple interests, like an estuary, the coming together of freshwater and saltwater. It's where those two things come together that we have the most fertile ecosystems. And much the same, when we bring together different ideas and perspectives, we can create something new and better. But in order to harness that potential, we have to not be afraid of it, and we have to have skills to harness that potential. So really, how parties deal with conflict is going to determine whether it becomes productive or destructive. And ultimately, how we communicate around conflict, and if we effectively communicate, that's how we make it productive and avoid conflict becoming destructive and resulting in what we call a dispute, right, where we have now a destructive conflict. Even once we have a dispute, even when we're at each other's throats or throwing proverbial or maybe physical punches, effective communication can still get things back on the right track and actually make that difference of perspectives and ideas productive. And really tying into what I want to talk about today, when we need to reach agreement on courses of action, when we need to make decisions together, or when we make decisions that directly affect a lot of people, this effective communication entails what we're going to call collaboration, which is fundamentally based on interest-based negotiation. And we'll talk more about that. So I really want to premise this whole conversation by clarifying what collaboration isn't and what it is, so we can be talking about the same thing when we talk about collaboration. Collaboration is not kumbaya, let's all just get along. And it's not just being nice. That is not collaboration. Just being nice can create more destructive conflict than it avoids. When we avoid conflict, when we try not to deal with it, even though it's there, it often becomes destructive. Collaboration is not just meeting or talking. People will say, oh, we meet with folks all the time. Well, are you talking about the right things? And are you actually negotiating solutions that work well for all parties? Because if not, you're not collaborating. Just meeting or talking isn't enough. Collaboration is not synonymous with public participation. They are not the same, even though they are related. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Collaboration is also not you telling them what to do or them telling you what to do, which I sometimes hear from folks, oh, well, we told this federal agency they should do this, but they're not collaborating with us. They're not doing what we told them to. That's not collaboration. And I'm going to make the case here in a moment that collaboration is not the same as compromise. It concerns me as a collaboration professional that we hear from Congress and our decision makers, we need to be better at compromising. I'm making the case compromise isn't the objective. Working together to problem solve is, and those are not necessarily even related and they're not the same thing. So what is collaboration? Collaboration, as I mentioned before, is a fundamentally pragmatic skill. There is a skill set behind this. We are not inherently born to collaborate, even though for some of us, these skills might come easier and they might be harder for some of us. Collaboration is fundamentally a way to make conflict productive, as I said before, and doing so through effective multi-party problem solving, whether it's two parties or hundreds of parties. And doing so through using interest-based or what we call mutual gains negotiation to address what I'm going to call an issue of mutual concern. I'll talk about that term in a moment. And at its best, collaboration is really about the co-creation of innovative solutions. Again, that estuary of ideas where we get to some place better by bringing together our difference and working through it productively. So why collaborate? Right? Well, sometimes because we basically have to. Something, whether it's an opportunity or a challenge, is bringing us together, even if we don't see eye to eye about it, and even if we have really different ideas about how to address it. And that could be air quality, or it could be a public health issue like a pandemic. We can't solve it on our own. So we need to find a way to work together to problem solve. And when we don't work together to problem solve, when we're brought together by this issue of mutual concern, we lose value or we create more problems by fighting and not working together, Whereas by actually working together and finding good solutions that work well for all parties, we can create value. And again, we can create something new and better. And that ultimately requires, like I've said before, really effective communication, and really seeking to find what we call mutual gain solutions, solutions that work well for all parties and are better than if we hadn't reached agreement. All of that involves actually building trust and knowing people are going to follow through on their commitments. At its best, again, collaboration is a very creative process. Creativity and open-mindedness, as somebody said in the chat earlier, go a long way towards multi-party problem solving. And ultimately, really effective collaboration involves achieving your interests while helping meet those of others. Basically going from what we call a zero-sum game of for me to do well, you have to lose, to realizing we can all do better by working together, getting really creative, exploring out-of-the-box solutions, bringing new resources and new parties to the table, and ultimately negotiating solutions that work well for all of us and meet our key interests. Again, we're going to talk more about all of this. So you're going to hear me use this term, distinction is a better way of putting it, the difference between interests and positions, already using that term interests. I want to really clarify the difference and make sure we have a shared language by the time we leave this session. And I tell all my trainees, if you walk away from this session with a clear understanding of the difference between interests and positions and an ability to put that into action, I have changed the world. This is one of the most fundamental concepts of making conflict productive. And I like to illustrate the difference by telling what we call the story of the orange. So imagine a scenario, it's Mother's Day. Mom walks into the kitchen and her 2 teenage kids are fighting over the last orange in the kitchen. And mom, being really upset that they're fighting on Mother's Day when all she's asked for is just a peaceful Mother's Day, walks in, grabs the orange, cuts it in half, and gives each of the kids half of the orange and says, stop fighting, stop being silly, there's one orange, half of an orange is clearly the only fair solution. And both of the kids get in a tizzy and they both throw their half of the orange on the ground and they stomp out. And mom says, gosh, like what is going on with the kids? And she goes and talks to her teenage daughter and says, why are you so upset? There was one orange, clearly half of an orange is the only fair solution. And the daughter, being all snooty, says, thanks for nothing, Mom. I was going to try and surprise you with a batch of really yummy muffins, and I needed the rind of a whole orange to make that recipe. Half of a rind's not going to work. It's going to mess up the recipe, and now I've messed up Mother's Day. Mom's like, oh, gosh, okay, well, all right. And she goes and talks to her son and says, son, why are you so upset? Like, clearly, half of an orange is the only fair solution. And he says, Mom, I was going to marinate some steak tonight and I needed the juice of a full orange to make that recipe. And now I can't do that for you. And I feel like a terrible son. So thanks for nothing. And mom steps back and says, if I had just walked into that room and said, hold on, time out. Why are we fighting over the orange? What is it that we want about this orange? And if she kept asking questions until she really got to understand that the daughter wanted the rind of a full orange to make this muffin recipe, and the son wanted the juice of a full orange to make his recipe, that could have been separated. The kids could have made their recipe and everybody could have had muffins and everybody could have had marinade. Or the mom might have said, well, great, we can get you the rind of the full orange, but we also have a lemon. Would you like to try making that recipe with lemon? That sounds delicious, right? So think about this. If we had just asked those questions of why do we want this thing and got to what we're going to call the interest underlying it, the underlying concern or need, not only could we have met those different interests, it wasn't a mutually exclusive problem in the first place, even though it may have seemed to be because there was only one orange, but also we could have gotten to really creative solutions of other ways of meeting those interests. So fundamentally, interests are the why. Like I said, the underlying need or concern. And once we really get to understand that, we can look at different ways of meeting that underlying need or concern. And the positions are the what or the how, right? The means to the end, the way we espouse or are pushing to meet that need. I need a full orange. Well, do you really need a full orange? Do you even need the rind of an orange, right? These are good questions to ask. And so often our conversations are fundamentally positional conversations. Mask mandate or no mask mandate. That is the only way to deal with the pandemic, apparently, because that's all we're talking about. And instead, we need to be talking about public health, slowing the spread of disease. Everybody wants to be healthy. Nobody wants to shut down the economy. That needs to be our conversation. And then a question of how can we work to get there together in a way that works for all parties. But that is not the conversation we're having. We're having a very positional conversation. And one thing I really want to drive home about the story of the orange is everyone's like, yeah, that's too simplistic. Life's not like that. as somebody who works in the field all the time, I can tell you more often than not, people think they have an intractable conflict. And as soon as we start talking about interests, we don't have to change anything. Everyone's interest can be met by just simply understanding what they need and tweaking the conversation a little bit. So I really do actually encourage you to engage with that and say, this is actually more realistic than you think. And at a minimum, if you get to the interest in a situation, you can get creative about how to meet those interests. It doesn't have to be the rind of an orange. It can be a lemon. It could be any variety of other things. But if we don't recognize that making this recipe is kind of the thing we're trying to get to, we can't get to that creative conversation. So I just want to let folks know that throughout this presentation today, I'm going to stop and ask you some questions, check in. So if you have a bunch of questions going on right now, that's fine. Hold on to them for just a moment. So first check-in, thinking about what was just presented, what is one observation, insight, or question that comes up for you? So take a moment, open up your chat again. Oops, let's go back. Open up your chat again and type your response in, but please don't hit enter until I ask you to. That way they can all show up at the same time. So again, one observation, one insight, one question, and I welcome your honest thoughts. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. No rush. And then once you've entered yours, take a look and see what other people are putting in there. So I'm seeing a lot of recognitions about the importance of asking why. We jokingly say the why thing, just keep asking why until you feel like you really, really understand. I'm seeing some questions about what do you do when your counterparty is not willing to communicate? And there's some, it's a challenge, but asking good questions goes a heck of a long way, and asking questions with real intention to understand goes a long way. Again, just the importance of communication, thinking outside of the box. I love this last one, understand the situation before jumping to conclusions. I spent a lot of time training professionals, don't jump to problem solving. If you don't understand what's going on, you're probably gonna solve the wrong problem. And we recommend a whole process called situation assessment as a way of understanding a system before you intervene in it. So again, there's lots of directions we could go, but we're not going to go to all of them today. Lots of great observations there. Thank you all for sharing. Again, I'll keep checking in from time to time. So let me ask this question also via the chat. When I say compromise, that word compromise, what do you think of, or how does it make you feel? And just be honest. Again, I don't love the word compromise, but that doesn't mean you have to not love it. So when I say the word compromise, what do you honestly think of, and how does it make you feel? Type your response into chat, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. All right, when you're ready to enter your response, please do. If you need more time, take it. And I just want to say it's nice to see a number of familiar names in the chat box, since I can't actually see you on the screen. So you can take a moment and look through what each other are saying about what compromise means to people or how it makes them feel. I'm seeing nobody wins, win some, lose some, giving up something to get something, feel like you're making a sacrifice, giving up something. I'm seeing a lot of that, giving something up, or just okay, like it's okay, meh. Some people say meh, it makes me feel pretty meh. So there's no right or wrong answer to this question, like I said. We'll talk in a moment about how I think of compromise, or what the dictionary thinks of compromise. But let's ask this question. When I say co-creation, how does that honestly make you feel? Or what does that make you think of? And again, any response is fine. Whatever you honestly feel is great. Type your response in, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. And while people are typing in their responses, for anybody who joined us a little bit late, I'm inviting you all to rename yourselves in Zoom so that we can see your organization show up, so we know where you're coming from. If you scroll over the thumbnail of yourself in Zoom, your little video picture, you should see 3 bubbles in the right-hand corner. Click on that. You can then rename yourself, first, last name, and then organization would be great. And that way, when we see your chat, we can see where people are coming from. All right, so what do people think of when I say co-creation? Enter your responses when you're ready. If you need more time, take it. And as those responses are coming in, you can take a moment and look at each other's. Still waiting for a number of responses, so I'm going to hold steady for a moment and see if we can get a few more responses to what does co-creation make you think of? How does it make you feel? All right, as the last few come in, some of the things I'm seeing are unity, really working together to accomplish something, having an investment or a part in creating the outcome, right? So buy-in, both parties win. And this isn't just a terminology thing, right? Words actually have power. The way we think of the world creates the world. If I can't tell the difference between interests and positions, I see everything as the same. Whereas I hope you all leave today and say, oh, that's a position. Why does that person feel that way? What is their interest? Oh, now I understand their interest. We can do something about that. And that's the same with compromise versus co-creation. If we're really aiming to compromise, we're sort of like, well, let's just get to some bottom barrel solution. We've compromised. That was the goal. Here we are. And if we're really aiming for this thing you're talking about as actually all parties creating the solution together, buying into it, problem solving, that's a different aspiration. So just to clarify, when I hear the word compromise and when we look at the actual dictionary terminology, it really has to do with giving up something that really matters to you. A tit for tat concession. You give a little, I give a little till we get to somewhere. It's probably bottom of the barrel solution, but we got somewhere. Sacrificing key interests or values. Well, to get an agreement, I had to give up something that really mattered to me. And now I'm not super happy about it, but I guess we got agreement. And really, like I said, getting to that lowest common denominator, because that's the only way we can see to reach an agreement. Co-creation instead is really about expanding the pie, about making the situation a non-zero sum game, that you don't have to lose for me to do well and I don't have to lose for you to do well. And we get there by really focusing on meeting each other's key interests and honoring each other's values. Okay, that matters to you. I hear that. I'm not going to refute that. How can we meet the needs you have as well as my needs? Creating something really new and better through working together, right? That estuary of ideas, getting creative. Really focusing on outcomes that are fair, efficient, stable, and wise, meaning they work well for all parties. Parties see them as fair. They were efficiently reached. We didn't waste a bunch of time getting somewhere together. Might take time, but we weren't wasting time. They were effective in actually solving the problem or that issue of mutual concern that brought us together in the first place. And we all can really get behind them and actually see them implemented. So they're stable. They actually get implemented. And at its best, again, co-creation is really about innovating together. So you might think of the difference between compromise and co-creation as the difference between putting hot water and cold water together and getting lukewarm water, which sometimes we want that, but usually that's pretty unexciting. And instead putting a bunch of ingredients together, some bananas and some flour and some milk, and then we get banana bread, right? By putting those different things together, we get something new and better. That's co-creation. All right, that's all great. Maybe you buy what I just said and you can totally see the potential of collaboration, but how do you do this collaboration thing? And like I said at the beginning of today's session, this is a total crash course, more than anything awareness building. I spend many, many months training people how to collaborate, and then it's still a lifelong practice. So we're not gonna get to the end of that point today, but I do want you to have some basic understanding and awareness of the skills that go into collaboration. I think of collaboration both as acting collaboratively, what we call a way of being, a way of interacting, and then collaboration as a process or collaborative decision-making, or what I sometimes call capital C collaboration. Acting collaboratively is something we can do every moment of our lives and involves effective communication, focusing on your interests and speaking from your interests, not positions, versus everybody has to wear a mask saying, I'm really concerned about public health. I'm also really concerned about keeping the economy open. One way we might get towards that goal is actually having a mask mandate so we can really slow the spread of disease. However, there might be other ways to get there. So let's talk about that, right? That's what it looks like to communicate from interest and to be open-minded and explore options. Really focusing on understanding and trying to address other people's interests. What do you care about? What matters to you? Why? Really seeking to understand. Instead of taking a no approach, instead taking a yes and. Right? I hear from you that you find it uncomfortable to wear a mask, and I'd love to find a way to address that so we can still slow the spread of this disease. You can tell I'm going to use our current pandemic as an ongoing example because it's very timely. So really focus instead of a block of just a no, can't do that. Instead of a yes, I hear you, I can validate what matters to you, and we can still build on it, and I can share it matters to me. I don't necessarily have to validate your position. I don't have to say, fine, you don't have to wear a mask, or fine, everybody has to wear a mask. I can say, yes, I hear you, and let's talk about this. Really behaving in ways that build trust. A big part of that is just following through on our commitments. If we say we're going to do something, following through on it. Really listening to understand also builds trust with people. Being honest and transparent, including about your sideboards. Right? A federal agency might say, we would love to open this road up for ATV use, and that's actually totally against all of our plans and mandates. We can't do that. This is a yes and. I hear you saying you'd like this to happen, and we can't do it. And I'd love to explore other areas we could create more access for ATVs. Let's talk about that. And then don't assume. Really learn and try to understand. The fundamental principle of effective communication is trying to understand what's going on for somebody through effective listening and effectively asking good questions. And I could spend a long time talking about that, but that's the basic core principle of effective communication. So then let's talk about collaborative decision-making and this process, this capital C collaboration thing. What that's all about is really meaningfully engaging all key stakeholders. Everybody who can make or break a decision or who's directly affected by it should be part of the decision-making in a collaborative process. There might be different roles for different kinds of people, but everybody should have a stake in it, understand it, and be part of negotiating solutions that work well for all affected parties. Collaborative decision-making really requires clarifying and focusing on the issue of mutual concern, really understanding what is that opportunity or challenge that brings us all together and focusing all of our conversation around it. Okay, we are all really concerned about public health. Nobody wants to get sick with the coronavirus. Nobody wants to lose a loved one to it. And nobody wants to shut down the economy. We actually have a lot of shared interests. And we have some different ideas of how we're going to get there. Let's talk about what matters to different parties, and let's find something that everybody can get behind to achieve those goals we've all identified as really important. That needs to be the conversation all the time, because people will lose sight of that issue, mutual concern. They will lose sight of shared interests, and they will get very positional, because that's how we've been taught to communicate, if we don't help people keep the focus in the right place. Collaborative processes use the right form of collaborative process. Can't go down that rabbit hole right now, but there are different ways to collaborate, and different situations merit different processes. Really committing to consensus where appropriate. And we define consensus not as unanimous agreement, but as having enough people buy in that we can really move forward with an agreement and nobody's totally left out. And we try to address everybody's concerns to the best of the ability of the group. At its core, engaging in interest-based negotiation. Again, a topic for a semester-long course. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole, but just focusing on interests and trying to find solutions that meet everybody's interests are the core of it. Focusing on co-creation and innovation. We talk about separating inventing from committing, which means creating spaces for parties to come together and get really creative together and invent before anybody says, well, this is what we're going to do, or who's going to pay for it, or how are we going to make this happen, or you should pay for it. None of that. We just try to think, what are all the things we could do to address this issue of mutual concern and address the interests we've identified, creating space for that before you start to get too focused on what's going to happen, because that's when people start to put on their blinders and get fearful, and you shut down all the creativity. You need to act collaboratively throughout any collaborative decision-making process. Just all that left-hand column stuff is kind of the core. If we all did that, conflict would be productive most of the time. Importantly, if you're going to do a collaborative process, we always recommend investing in what we call situation assessment. I mentioned this earlier, but this is basically where somebody, ideally a more neutral party, goes out and does a lot of diagnostic work to understand what's going on here. What are the sources of unproductive conflict? What are people's interests? Who needs to be involved? And what does that all mean for how we design an appropriate process? And then that bottom point is, where appropriate and where necessary, invest in a neutral facilitator. If the trust in the group is super low, if people have been in conflict for a long time, if people are jaded about the possibility of collaboration, if there's just too many parties, it's too complex, hire somebody who is neutral to the situation, who has no dog in the fight, and whose job it is to design and oversee the process. And do so as early as possible. My biggest complaint for people coming to me for help is they come and they're like, well, we've had a bunch of meetings and people are really upset, and now we've got all these issues and nobody wants to talk to each other. Can you help me? And I will say, because I'm an academic and it's my job to promote best practices for collaboration, I'll say this process is on the wrong track. I can help you try to get it in a better direction, but I needed you to come to me months ago so we could have done a situation assessment, designed an appropriate process, helped make sure everybody felt heard, and make sure that this process was heading the right direction. So it doesn't mean you can't get neutral assistance later on, but if you really want to set a process up for success and you think you're going to need some neutral assistance, or even think that might be necessary, talk to somebody, get somebody on board, and have them really help you design a process. All right, so again, the difference between acting collaboratively and collaborative decision-making. Sometimes it's enough to just go out and do all those things of just being a collaborative person, and that will go a long way. And sometimes we need to get people together negotiating solutions, and that's where a process is going to be more relevant, and those things feed off of each other. All right, so another check-in. Again, I'm going to ask everybody to open up the chat, and I would just love for you to share what's one observation or insight you've had from what was just presented or something you're thinking about. And take a moment, type your response into the chat, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. And just a reminder for anybody who joined us late, you want to make sure that your chat is going to all panelists and attendees, not just to the panelist. That way everybody can see what each other is sharing. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. What is one observation or one insight that's coming through for folks? Seeing some stuff come in. So again, folks, take time if you need it, but as some of these responses are coming in, if you've already entered yours, take a moment, look through each other's. Some things I'm seeing is just the potential value of a third party. Again, I don't recommend it for every situation, and there are times where it's really necessary and helpful, and it can just really help you take the pressure off yourself. Really thinking about how to make it work in a city council where you don't necessarily control the conversation. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but we're doing a lot of training with cohorts, so whole organizations or whole teams, so that everybody gets it and understands it, so people can support each other in doing this work and be coaches for each other, but also designing processes with this awareness together instead of having internal conflict. Just that value of yes and yes but, so powerful, and just changing the way we communicate and the way we think goes a long way. Make sure you don't effectively yes but somebody, but say the word and. Sometimes people basically block, but they'll say and, it's not really an and. So again, intention really matters. I love that it reminds me collaboration is possible and needed. I firmly believe that's why I do the work I do. And it's not easy, right? And most of us don't have these skill sets. And that's where I'm part of like I'm here to proselytize, right? And just the value of taking time to listen. Great, lots of observations there. Just want to give you a moment because I want to make sure at the end of today's, when I'm done presenting, that I address any questions or concerns coming up for you. So take a moment, and if you want to enter any lingering question or concern that comes up for you, you can type your response in, but don't enter until I ask you to. And if you're not typing, you can take a moment and again, look through each other's responses. I personally love seeing what each other are sharing via the chat. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need some more time, take it. I'm kind of track those if they come in. I'm seeing a couple questions that have kind of come through as ahas or questions just around how do you deal with people who aren't so willing to come to the table, or people who are maybe not skilled in this line of stuff, or just what we call difficult stakeholders. I'm going to make a note for myself to come back to that at the end of today. And some people just making personal observations about their recognition. How do we recognize and step back to assess the situation? Great question. There's a whole process we use as process designers, but there's also sort of a mini version of that that any public official, I would argue, should be doing before they try to design a process or design an intervention. Great things. If people want to keep entering questions, if you haven't already entered yours, please do. I'm going to move on. So I want folks to take just a moment and actually think about this before you type in a response. I want to talk about the connection between collaboration and public participation a bit, because I know so many of you basically have a mandate for public participation. It may be a checkbox you have to hit. It's probably something you do a lot of, or at least are very aware of. So take a moment and think about, what is the purpose of public participation? You all know I love the word why. So why are we doing it? Think about that for a moment. And if you want to, you can start to type a response into the chat. I'd love to hear some thoughts about this, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. So think about this question for a moment. When you're ready, type your response in, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. All right, if you haven't already started typing something in, maybe you can type in a response, short or long. And when you're ready, you can hit enter. And I want to hear some thoughts about what is the purpose and why do it. Once you've entered your response, you can take a moment, look through each other's. So I'm seeing just getting feedback, understanding the needs, wants, and ideas of my interests or my residents or constituents. And again, I'd say that need, right? Trying to really get to the interests of folks so you can help meet them is something I'd be thinking about. To really create a space for the public to be heard. Recognize that being heard doesn't mean just having a chance to share. It means that you truly were heard. And that's one of the places that public participation can go wrong, as we'll talk about in a moment. Transparency, trust building, and getting information, listening. And take a moment, look through each other's responses. Lots of good stuff there. I like that we need to know the why they need to get to the orange, or like they need to get to their interests, right? So one of the core things I would really advocate for all of you who do public participation processes to really think about is how do you design a process to help people clarify for themselves what their interests are and then communicate those to you as public officials. Because so often, as you know, people say, no mask mandate. We are all storming into City Hall and saying we don't want a mask mandate. What's happening there? People are strongly pushing a position and you have no idea why necessarily. And you might jump to a lot of assumptions of like, they're just being jerks or they don't care about public health or they're right? But what's really going on for those people? So often our public participation processes don't actually help people clarify for themselves. Because I suspect a lot of people who might protest a mask mandate, if you said, well, why are you here protesting? They say, because I don't want a mask mandate. Okay, well, why? Because I don't want a mask mandate, right? And they might get kind of stuck there. A lot of us are used to thinking in positions. So part of what we have to do through effective public participation is help people have a space to clarify for themselves what's really going on for them. What do they really care about? That might not be as obvious to us or to other people as we think it would be. So keep that in mind. And ultimately, you want to be collecting information on people's fundamental needs and concerns. And we're going to talk about this more in a moment. So again, lots of really good stuff there in the chat, and I really appreciate you all sharing. I'm also seeing this notion of to inform constituents, right? Sometimes it's information to us. We want to listen, we want to hear, we want to know what's going on for you so we can address it, but we also might want you to understand what's going on and understand our constraints, right? I talked about sideboards. We may need to communicate to you why we can't do that, or just that we're going to close your road for road construction. So let's think for a moment about this next question, and I'm going to talk more about this in a moment, but I'd love for you to think about it and share your thoughts. What do you see as the relationship between public participation and collaboration, as I've talked about it? And if you're drawing a total blank, that's fine, or if you have some thoughts, that's fine. Take a moment, type your response in the chat, but don't hit enter until I ask you to. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. Let me give a moment more and see if we can get a few more responses in. Lots of good stuff coming in. Again, once you've entered your response, you can take a moment, look through each other's. As some additional responses come in, I'm seeing one can't happen without the other. They're connected. They're both vital. Collaboration would make public participation more effective and less confrontational. We are co-creating with our communities. Two different steps to move forward, gathering information and then working to see how it can be addressed. Again, lots of really good stuff in there. So to share one way of thinking about these things and their relationship and how they're connected and how they're also different, like I said, in my world at least, public participation, or what we call P2, isn't synonymous with collaboration. Many of you might be familiar with IAP2, the International Association for Public Participation. You might also have seen the spectrum of participation before. But basically, I think of public participation as, in a really positive sense of this term, bringing the public along for the ride, right? Really helping the public understand why we're doing what we're doing, what our constraints are, understanding their needs so we can address them and so they feel like this is working for them. I really think that public participation is about this very positive idea of bringing people along for the ride, not dragging them along for the ride, but really we're all here together and we're moving forward together. What that looks like depends on the situation. And I've been emphasizing this and I'll keep emphasizing it. What the situation is and understanding that and doing your diagnostic work then influences the process you design. And that's true for what kind of collaborative process you design, but also what kind of public participation process you design. And the spectrum is designed to help you think about the different ways that can look. So on the left, you see that there's sort of a public participation goal and then the promise to the public that goes along with that. And then along the top, you're seeing some different ways of engaging the public. So to walk through this just quickly, the sort of most basic form of public participation is we're going to inform you. We're going to provide you some information public and just let you know what we're doing and basically keep you informed, right? And that is our promise. All we are promising to do is keep you informed. You might consult with the public, and that's where you basically want to obtain public feedback or analysis, say on alternatives or a decision. And at that point, if you're consulting with the public, you are making the promise that we will keep you informed, we will listen to and acknowledge your concerns and aspirations, and we're gonna provide some feedback on how we did or didn't use that information, how it did or didn't influence our decision. And this is one place that public participation falls apart so often. Is there's sort of information out, I inform you, information in, I get some information from you, and then I don't tell you how I used what you shared with me. So you're like, I took a bunch of time and I wrote this comment and I was very thoughtful, I did my research, and then it went into a black hole. And I can't see how my information was used in your decision, and now I feel like you wasted my time. So sit and think for a moment whether you've been part of a process like that, you've seen a process like that, you've heard of a process like that. I can't see you all raise hands, but usually I would ask how many people have seen something like that where basically the public felt really unheard, even though the whole process was supposed to hear them. I raised my hand, see way too many processes like that. And I don't fault the public officials or people doing it, but it is a lack of awareness of when you consult with your public, you are basically promising to them that you will hear them. And hearing is not just you submit some comments and I read them and maybe I do something with them, but you don't understand what I did with them. So just taking that step to maybe even summarize, we received 500 comments. Key themes from across those comments were this, this, and this. Here's how we've tried to address those. It might be, here's why we can't do this thing. You asked me to put a bus stop right next to your house. Let me understand, that help you understand why that we're not going to do that. I really appreciate your feedback. I want you to understand why we're not going to do that. But we also heard from you that you wanted to improve public transportation in your community, and here's how we're addressing that need. Right? That's the kind of communication we need to have, not necessarily at an individual level, but people need to see how the information they shared was actually used and understood. So that's the consult bucket. And then there's involve, right? So we're kind of ramping up the engagement. And this is really working directly with the public throughout a process to ensure that public concerns and aspirations are consistently understood and considered. So this becomes a much more iterative process. And the commitment is we will work with you to ensure that your concerns and aspirations are directly reflected. And this might become some sort of an advisory committee where certain members of the public are involved in advising a process, and it's an interactive engagement. And then we step it up to a more collaborative process. And this is where you really partner with the public or affected stakeholders in decision-making. Right? And this is what we've been talking about today. IAP2 might think about it a little bit differently than I do, but basically the idea is that we are going to engage you in decision-making. Like that's when I say collaboration, that's what I mean. And nobody gets to say what the decision is, but we create it, we co-create it together. And on the far right, there's this bucket of empower, which you don't see very often. It's not really a process that I would recommend often, but basically where you put the final decision-making in the hands of the public. And there might be a time and a place for that. And the commitment there is we will implement what you decide. And that's a real transition of power. So again, what part of why it doesn't happen very often and why it might not always be appropriate, but there might be a time and a place where that is the right solution. And I think it's worth thinking about. These are all tools in your bucket, in your toolkit, and they're appropriate in different situations. And make sure that you're choosing the right approach for the right situation. Because if you try to collaborate when people just want to be informed, they don't want to show up at many, many meetings. They just want to know what's going on. If you try to collaborate, it's going to fall apart. But if you just try to keep people informed when those decisions directly affect people's lives and livelihoods and they want to be part of decision-making and really need a seat at the table, just trying to keep them informed is going to blow up in your face, right? So being really thoughtful about what it means to bring the public along for the ride and what level of engagement you need to take and what is the promise you're making and making sure you follow through on that promise. Like I said, trust is very much tied to following through. So if we make commitments, following through on that. And when we don't, people lose trust in us as public officials, they lose trust in government, and that's a huge problem. All right, so let's hear from you again. How well do you think you do at this public participation thing? And I'm guessing we have a number of people on the call who do this day in and day out. So just your own honest reflections. Feel free to give yourself a pat on the back if you feel pretty good. If you feel like you could improve in this area, fine. Take a moment and just type into the chat, how well do you think you do at public participation? And maybe you have a nuanced response to that. Don't hit enter till I ask you to. I'm going to start entering these prompts in the chat so you can start to differentiate our responses to different questions. So when you're ready, hit enter. How well do you think you do at public participation? And as those responses come in, you can see what each other are saying. Could improve, may be helpful to train the public on how they can be involved. I think that's huge. I think setting really clear expectations and setting people up for success and being involved in effective ways is really important. Seeing some questions. What do you do when residents want empowerment when the city only needs to inform or consult them? I think you have an issue there because you think you only need to inform and consult them and they don't feel like that's enough, right? So you need to figure out, this is where the situation assessment is really important. Why do they feel that they need to have the decisions offered up to them? What are their interests behind that position, right? They're being positional about how they should be engaged. Are you assuming that's what they want? Maybe you just need involvement. Right? They want to be more involved, but they only understand, like, the only thing they know how to say is, I want to make the decision. But you're like, well, there's somewhere in between. Right? So my question is always going to be, why? Why do they feel that way? And why do you feel that inform or consult is the appropriate thing? Are you being too constrained? Are you being lazy? Right? These are good questions to ask ourselves. I don't have time to do it. Well, guess what? If the public's going to sue you, you might want to take the time. These are things to consider. So going back to people's comments, seeing good, always room for improvement. Lots of, again, there's room for improvement. I partially have you share with each other because I think a lot of us have to do this all the time and recognize we haven't really been trained in it, or we don't really have skills, or we don't have time to do it well. And some people are really great at it and do it all the time. And again, it's still hard in certain situations. So thank you for sharing with me and sharing with each other. So next question. When it comes to this collaboration thing, thinking specifically about collaboration, we've been talking about, how well do you think you do at that? Take a moment, think about it, type your response in, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. And no right or wrong answers. Don't feel all pressure. Just let's be honest with each other. Right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. And give some more time. Again, don't feel rushed. Take the time you need, but when you're ready, you can hit enter. So as the responses come in, again, some people feel pretty good at it. Some feel not so great at it. Some people recognize their councils or their teams need to improve. Like I said, you may have all the awareness and skills and done a bunch of training and practice, and then you go to your council and propose an idea and they shut it down. Well, we don't want to involve people. That's way too much work. We're just going to inform them. Right? So we really need to be thinking about the cultures we operate in and building cultures of collaboration, because then we can support each other and then we can deploy these processes and learn together. Work in progress, it's true for all of us. I don't care how good you are at collaboration. It is a lifelong practice, and all the pieces of it, everything from effective listening to framing things appropriately, all things that we get to continue to practice throughout our entire lives. Lots of good stuff there. So appreciate you all sharing. So my basic premise, having done a lot of work in the public sector, and this is not a criticism at all, it's just a statement, is that most public officials and most people working in the public sector aren't as good at collaboration as they need to be. The public expects a seat at the table. Stakeholders are going to get upset if they don't feel the decisions reflect their interests. People are very conflictual right now. We're seeing it play out massively. And I could give a whole talk on just what's happening in our society and how positional we're becoming and how problematic that is for problem solving. But this is the world public officials have to operate in. And so now, probably more than ever, doubling down on the collaboration skill set and all the parts of it, I think, are so important. And basically, it's because any public sector concern isn't about an issue of mutual concern, right? It's in the public sector because it affects a lot of people. Some segment of the public, maybe a massive public, right? Air quality in the Salt Lake Valley affects all of us here, not to mention federal agencies and others. Traffic congestion, right? Some communities, everybody in that community cares about the fact you can't drive through their community because it's backed up with traffic. People care about economic development, right? A pandemic, it affects all of us, and we all have to be somehow part of the problem solving, and any intervention to address it is going to affect us. So public officials work in that space all the time. Everything you work on has a big issue of mutual concern. It's just a matter of who's involved in that issue of mutual concern, that opportunity or challenge that brings people into conversation with each other. And basically action needs to be taken, right? That's public sector decision making is all about action that needs to be taken that's going to affect a lot of people. And so you're working in this space where, gosh, you know what, we need to get people collaborating or at least know how to deal with conflict and deal with it productively. So since you're right in the middle of public conflicts and decisions, not only are you directly affected by it, but you also are really well positioned to exercise leadership. And leadership is fundamentally about mobilizing people to work together to problem solve. Going to reiterate that. Leadership is about mobilizing people to work together to problem solve. And if I were doing a training on leadership, we'd spend some time sitting with that. But one of the key things is that we often conflate leadership and authority, right? So if you're a planner or you're a mayor, you have structural authority. You have been authorized to do certain things, to make certain decisions, to convene certain conversations. That's your job. However, in those roles, or even if you're a community member, you can exercise leadership if you help mobilize people to work together to problem solve. And that could even be a citizen at a town hall meeting raising their hand and saying, I hear that we're really upset about mask mandates and like people think we should and shouldn't wear them. And it's just really occurring to me that none of us want to get sick. None of us want to shut down the economy. And none of us want to lose somebody we love to the coronavirus. So just as a concerned citizen, I just want to remind people of that and say, I'd really love for this community to work together to achieve those goals that we all hold dear, right? And that may or may not stick, but in that moment, people may have a like, oh my gosh, we had totally forgotten that like none of us want these things to happen. And by bickering here, we're losing value. We're not making progress on those goals because we're fighting each other over this positional thing. So leadership can be as much as asking a good question, or as little, I should say, as asking a good question at the right time. Or leadership could be doing other things, using your structural authority, if you have it, to mobilize people to work together to problem solve. So in a public official positions, you have that structural authority. It looks different whether you're a planner or a transportation engineer or a mayor, but you can leverage that to mobilize people to work together to problem solve. And that's why you all are so highly trained in conflict management, negotiation, collaboration, dispute resolution, all this stuff, right? Everybody got great training in that when you joined your job, I'm sure. And I say that totally snarkily, right? You're all being asked to deal with conflict all of the time. And probably most of you have never received any formal training in it. A lot of you have learned a lot of things through the crash course of your jobs. And I really appreciate the work that you are doing and the fact that you're showing up daily, especially in this highly charged world, to do your work and try to solve public problems. But I find it kind of unfair of us that we put a bunch of people into the public sector without that training. And frankly, like I said before, I think we all need some training in this. We all need to build this skill set. And I wish it was coming through in elementary school and high school and every day. But instead we're teaching debate rather than dialogue. And we're teaching people how to argue and win rather how to work together and problem solve. And that's unfortunately the public you get to work with, people who've been taught probably more how to debate than how to actually work together and problem solve. So some key takeaways just to really stitch this all together. And then I want to open this up for just some, a little bit more sharing via the chat. And I'm going to try and address some key things that have come up with the limited time we have. A reminder that conflict just is. And if you can sit with that and be comfortable with it and accept it, in some ways it changes the world for you because you say, it just is, I'm not going to fight it. What am I going to do about it? Like we said, it could be really destructive or productive, and it's what you do about it that matters. And effective communication is a key to making it productive and avoiding it becoming destructive. When we need to make decisions or when we need to take action together, effective communication entails collaboration. And collaboration, as we've talked about, is this pragmatic skill set that's really rooted in interest-based negotiation. It is not the same as public participation, although public participation can be more or less collaborative. And in some situations, to engage the public properly requires collaborative processes. One thing I also do want to mention that I didn't say explicitly when we looked at the IAP2 spectrum is if you have a stakeholder-driven collaborative process, let's say, for example, that you are negotiating a solution on how to have a grazing allotment managed, and you've got the grazer there and federal agencies and some other folks and NGOs, and they're negotiating a solution. Even in that situation, if there is a public who cares about that allotment and who's concerned, you need to bring them along for the ride. So often a stakeholder-driven negotiation process has a public participation element to it. And if you fail to bring the public along for the ride, and I think this happened a little bit with the Mountain Accord here in Salt Lake, things were happening, people are negotiating solutions, and the public didn't understand it, and then they got really concerned and they basically tore down the process. And things are moving forward, but there were some real ripples for a while because I think the public didn't feel like they understood and knew what was going on. And that's a great example of how if you don't engage the public, even a collaborative process that's going really well can actually get kind of disrupted. So I just want to highlight that. So a reminder, again, the reality of your jobs is you're right in the middle of most public sector conflicts, or just your jobs every day, you're dealing with different perspectives and interests. And you're in a good position to exercise leadership, to really mobilize people to work together to problem solve. And that's why I think that it's really important that you all have this skill set and that you take it seriously and that you continue to practice it. And as many people have mentioned, that your colleagues also get this stuff and they also care about it and they have those skills. Because if your council or if your staff or if your mayor, other people don't believe in this and see the value and want to take the time to do it right, or just don't even know how, it can be really hard for you as an individual agent to go forward and do what you need to do. And finally, like I said, I wish this was an inherent skill set. It's something anybody can learn, but we aren't taught this from our youngest ages. Maybe some people are in their families, but I know at least for me, I had pretty good schooling and I think I have a really good family that cared, but my parents didn't have the language of interest in positions, right? Now they do because I train my family, but this is stuff that very few of us are gonna get unless we intentionally lean into it and create a space to develop that skill set. This is not a call for everybody shall go forth and do a bunch of training, but I do really encourage you to access the resources that are out there. I'm happy to direct you to more resources. And if you are really keen and you want to be a kind of a leader for collaboration, we can definitely line you up with some places where you can build that skill set and continue to practice. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share. I think these slides will probably be made publicly available for everybody, but I'm going to share this information on the final slide. And what I want to do with this last little bit of time, we have about 10 minutes, is get a few final thoughts from you all. And then, like I said, address any lingering questions or concerns that we have time to address. So let me paste into the chat my contact information, just so you have that and a link to our different, just pasted into the chat, my name, so you have that there, but my email address, a link to our EDR program website, and a link to our blog that we run. It's called EDR Blog, and it shares lessons and experiences of collaboration. And I also want to share a link to a handout we've produced on just collaboration key concepts. That might be helpful for you, just for a reminder and kind of recapping everything that we've talked about here today. And also something you could share with your colleagues, right? It takes what we've talked about today, recaps it, but you can share that with other people. I'm seeing a question coming from Vern via recommending a book that addresses all of this, or do you need in-person training? There are tons of books. They're really good books. I think if you literally just type in collaboration or conflict resolution, a lot of things will pull up. I recommend to every class that I ever teach the book Getting to Yes, which is a fundamental negotiation text. So it talks about the negotiation side of things, but ties to bigger things. But I would encourage you to maybe look online and see what resonates with you. In-person training is helpful because these are person-to-person skills. And again, I'm not saying everybody needs to do that, but it's nice to have the sandbox, a place where you can practice and explore without it being high-stakes situation. So I put my email address in the chat. I would encourage anybody who's curious, who wants to know more, who wants recommendations on books, anything, just follow up with me and we can figure out more what you're looking for and what you need, and then get you some suggestions on that. Again, this is not a plug for training, but I do want to let you all know that my program does do a lot of training. So if you walk away and you're like, my whole council needs to know this stuff, talk to me. We could either think about designing something specifically for your need, maybe multiple councils or multiple cities, or we can direct you to other organizations that do that kind of work. Additionally, we do a standing training every year. It's particularly focused on natural resource collaboration, but we have lots of planners and urban folks participate. So I just put a little bit of information about, it's this year's course handout, but it will give you a sense of what that's all about. And like I said, I really think that everybody's in different places on the trajectory, has different needs. So since I can't really address that specifically here, the offer is open. Just follow up with me after today's session and I'll get you some information. And then with that, I want to hear from you just a little bit more via chat. So first question to you via the chat. I'm sorry, some of the chat stuff blurs together, but you'll see, what are your honest reactions to my proposal that most public officials, not you specifically, but most public officials aren't as good at collaboration as they need to be? So take a moment, type your response in the chat, but don't enter until I ask you to. So what's your honest reaction to that proposition? All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. And I deal with conflict all the time. I don't need you to agree with me, but what I'm seeing in there is a lot of agreement that rings true for people. Seeing that it ties to a lot of the issues maybe we're having in your community or just in society more broadly. Sobering, but true. As much as we try, we'll never be perfect. We just keep trying. Yeah, that's, like I said, lifelong practice. And one of the core parts of collaboration is knowing when to say, it didn't get it right. Being able to go to the public and say, we got some information from you and we thought we'd helped you understand why we're doing what we're doing, but you're still upset. So clearly we didn't get it right. Let's try again. And as hard as that might seem, that can be a hugely powerful thing for rebuilding trust in the public sector. So thank you all for your thoughts on that. Again, wasn't necessarily looking for affirmation so much as just to test my own assumptions. So another prompt for you in the chat. What skills or approaches have you found helpful in dealing with conflict, whether in your personal or professional lives? And this stuff is true to every aspect of our life. So take a moment, think about what skills you found helpful in productively dealing with conflict. And when you're ready, type your response in, but don't hit enter until I ask you to. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. So once you've entered your response, you can take a moment and look through others. Seeing a lot of listening. You've heard me emphasize that today. I think it's one of the most powerful things we can do, but effective listening isn't the same as just listening. Asking questions, good questions, really trying to understand perspectives, patience, open-minded attitude, remaining calm. Talk a lot about poise in this line of work, maintaining your poise. Even when somebody's calling you a jerk and saying you're the worst person ever, you can still sit there and say, wow, this person's really upset. And you know what? This probably isn't about me. But right now, the only thing they can see to do is call me names. So I'm just going to sit with that and come back and say, wow, I can hear you're really upset. And I'd like to better understand what's so upsetting to you so we can address it. Right? But if you get angry, if you lose control in that moment, it's going to be really hard to act productively. And so that actually ties to the last point I'm seeing, avoid knee-jerk reaction. Yeah, sitting and being calm, maintaining poise. All right, so new question via the chat, and thank you all again for engaging. This is fun to see what you have to say. So what would help you or other public officials or other people working in the public sector better deal with public sector conflict? More productively engage with the angry public, as we call it, angry public, or just generally help you mobilize people to work together to problem solve? So take a moment and think about that. What would be helpful to you or others you work with to kind of move this stuff forward? And I welcome all thoughts. I make no promises to address all the things you suggest, but I always like to know what you all think would be helpful so our program can really continue to support you and others in fostering a culture of collaboration. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. I'm going to give another 30 seconds or so for some of these responses to come in. So as maybe a few more responses come in, a few things that people are saying is just tips for de-escalating emotion. A Valium prescription can't help you there, but I think it's kind of funny. Sorry you're feeling that way. Integrating these concepts into public facing events and forums, right? And maybe just ways to do that, or just generally practicing doing that. Don't assume what others think or believe. Absolutely. One of the core things I hammer on in trainings is don't assume. Don't assume you know what's going on for somebody. Don't assume they won't talk to you. Don't assume they will talk to you. Don't assume they're going to storm your meeting. Don't assume they're not going to storm your meeting. All of those things. Ask questions, learn, explore, assess the situation, really try to understand. And as simple as that seems, it's so hard to put into action. Look for other options to gather input on conflictual issues, not just workshops, meetings, or open houses, right? You might have your certain set of tools that you do all the time, and maybe they're good. And maybe people are tired of them, or maybe they're just not working for this situation, or maybe they're not working at all. So just stepping back and again, asking yourself, what level of involvement do we think we need to have with the public? How do we do that? What are our options? How do we get creative? There's a lot of great examples out there. You can even search the internet for what other people are doing. And I'm saying just help the public understand how to communicate their whys instead of no, no, no. Absolutely. This is effective communication is a two-way street. So the more you can help your constituents or the people you work with, your stakeholders speak from interests, the farther you all can get together. All right, final question, and then we're going to just address any lingering questions and concerns. My question is, what is one lingering question or observation or concern you have? So take a moment, think about that, and then we'll use our last few minutes to address whatever comes up here and some things that have come up before. When you're ready, type your response in, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. All right, so as maybe a few more come in, just a lot to digest in a short time. I warned you, whirlwind tour, totally know that. Tried to pare it down as much as possible, but it's still a lot. Question about can we review this presentation later? I will make sure that this is shared with the ULCT and conference organizing folks, and I hope they can share it. And again, I gave you that handout. I'll put the handout link again in the chat right before we wrap up, so it's right there for anybody, but it has a lot of these key ideas on it. Just how to increase public participation, especially in major decisions our city faces. Great question. Again, part of it is, are we just engaging the public because we think we should, or does the public actually need to be engaged? I don't have the answer for that. It depends on the situation, but engagement just for engagement's sake is not necessarily productive. People get burned out. And when people need to have a say, are going to be concerned, really thinking about how can we make it easy and effective for people to engage. Continue to pay attention and try to avoid being taken by surprise. Yeah, observation, being observant, being mindful, really important skills in general in life, and especially for conflict-related work. People thinking about how to integrate this, how to take it back to their staff and their teams. I love thinking about that. If you want a thought partner in that, please let me know. Just the challenge of polarizing politics, creating a toxic environment for collaboration. I think it's just creating a toxic environment in general would be my take on it. And one thing I've really come to conclude in the last year is that identity politics are creating a situation in which interest-based conflict is now being seen as value-based conflict. If I see wearing a mask or not wearing a mask as part of my fundamental identity and core to my value system, then all of a sudden trying to move that to an interest-based conversation becomes a threat to my identity. And basically we're taking every issue right now, as far as I can see, and making it about our personal identities, and that's a problem. And so we need to create space for meaningful dialogue to help people be humans together and realize wearing a mask or not is not part of our identities. We can do this together. We need to. There's value in doing it together. Because otherwise we're going to be in a very toxic environment and it's going to be hard to solve any problems. And then I'm seeing this last one of how to tactfully say, I should have caught that, right? And I'm a big fan of don't should all over yourself, as people say, right? Should is sort of a challenging word because it's got an inherent judgment. Instead saying, wow, now that I see that this happened, it would have been I realized it would have been nice if I caught that and I didn't. And one of the key things I do with my team all the time is I'm doing the best I can, and I tried my best on that, and I recognize I didn't get it right. So let's try again. And I think that goes a long way of just saying that I didn't do as well as I could have on that one, and I now recognize I didn't put the time in, or wow, I don't even know how I missed that, but that's a problem, and I want to make it right. You don't need to have shame. It doesn't need to be a personal thing, but just an acceptance of wrong if it was done, or of not doing your best and of wanting to get it right. And as hard as that seems, it's actually really easy when we just accept that's not a value of us as a person. It doesn't make us a lesser person. It's just we don't always get it right. So I recognize that we are at noon. I'm going to stay on for a moment. And if anybody wants to continue to talk, we can, I think, unless they're going to get kicked off, in which case I'll get told. One thing I did want to address is just this, what do you do when people won't listen? So I invite anybody who wants to hop off, do so, but I'm going to address how do you deal with people who just don't get this stuff, who are difficult, who don't want to listen. So farewell to those of you who are getting off, and thanks for being here. Again, I'm here as a resource. Real quickly, I'll put my email back in there. And shoot me a note if you want more information, or if you want to get the slides right away. So in terms of dealing with people who don't want to listen, or people who don't want to share, or people who don't want to come to the table, or people who just want to yell at you. Those are sort of different things, but they have a lot of the same elements. Working with a lot of humans over a lot of years, I have come to a very firm belief that all of us deep down inside just want to be heard and understood. And when we don't want to talk with other people, or we want to yell at them, it's usually because we don't feel we're being heard and understood. And we feel like we just haven't been, or that we're not going to be. And so when you're in that situation, I think the question is, how do I create a space for somebody to truly feel heard and understood? And maybe I can't do it myself. Maybe somebody else needs to go and talk with them and say, hey, the city hears that you're really upset about this, and we'd really welcome your thoughts. And just so for the technician, I just saw your note that we're going to wrap up in 3 minutes. So basically, it may not be you, but somebody else might go to them and say, we understand your concern and we really want to hear your thoughts. I'm here to show up and really listen to you. Or maybe it's you saying, I recognize our past conversations have not been very productive, and I recognize what I brought to the table. And I would really love to understand what's going on for you so that we can address it to the best of our ability. And so being humble and owning your own contributions goes a heck of a long way. And if you really show up truly with the desire to understand and to listen, and just listen, ask questions like, tell me more, help me understand why you feel that way, and really bring the intention to do so, more often than not, people will show up and they will share. And if you ask good questions, the why questions, help me understand, why do you feel that way, you'll eventually get to interest. And you might then recap and say, what I'm hearing really matters to you is this, this, and this. Am I getting it right? And they might say, no, that's not right. Let's try again. And even if they get angry, you say, I'm clearly not getting it. Let's try again, right? Until you can recap what really matters to them and they say, yes, that's it. And at that moment, the world has changed for that relationship. So I hope that at least addresses that question that some folks had, if folks are still here on the call. And with that, I see we need to wrap up. So my thanks to you all for being here and for caring, and shoot me a note if you want to talk more about this stuff. Thanks, everybody.